Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Safer Arizona Wire. I'm your host, David Stephen Wisniewski.
And I'm your co-host, Tom Dean, your attorney for cannabis.
Tonight, Arizona lawmakers are trying to limit medical marijuana to just 2% THC. Also, we're going to be talking cannabis and guns, when you can possess both and when you can't. All that and more. But first, a message from our sponsors. This edition of Safer Arizona Wire is sponsored by azmarijuana.com, Arizona's #1 marijuana industry website. azmarijuana.com is your top quality source of Arizona cannabis news and so much more. Bypass the online censors. Sign up for their email list so their content gets sent directly to your email. Bypass the social media shadow bans. Google search AZ Marijuana Facebook, like and follow their page so their content gets sent directly to your feed. Now, back to today's regularly scheduled broadcast. All right, and we are back. I have with me right here an article from ArizonaMarijuana.com, new bill attempting to limit medical marijuana to just 2% THC. Now, Tom, this is obviously a problem. I can imagine that this would just wipe out the concentrates industry, but the bigger problem I see is that this does not seem to further the intent of the medical marijuana program. So we're going to be talking about something known as the Voter Protection Act. Tom, can you break down the Voter Protection Act and how this is a violation of that?
Sure, and there's a lot of problems with this bill, which is now in committee. A lot of people there in the state legislature would love to see this pass. And I think that this would effectively destroy the medical marijuana program here in Arizona.
We have does this say who introduced by? Here we go. I can't read all these names because they have like weird names, but if you look up HCR 2045, you can see who's introducing this.
Representatives, it's the House of Representatives here in Arizona. Representatives Bowers, Bollock, Cobb, Fincham,
they got
Griffin,
weird names.
Lawrence, Lieberman, Nutt, Osborne, Thorpe, Toma, and Udall.
These are the ones you got to vote out.
Now several people have introduced this bill together. So it does have, at least at this point, a lot of support being introduced. It's not a lone wolf and a piece of legislation or anything like that. But yes, I think we should talk about first, what does it say?
Right.
So I think a couple things. I mean, there's a couple things in here, but the main part is that this bill, if passed, would limit all medical marijuana in any form, whether flower or concentrate, would limit it to having no more than 2% THC in it. So
unbelievable.
I don't think that there's ever been anything with that 2% or lower THC that hasn't been classified as industrial hemp in decades. So this would really dramatically change medical marijuana in the state of Arizona. Flower, obviously, typically anything that anyone's going to be willing to buy, use as medicine, is going to have well over 2%, at least 15%, generally speaking.
Right.
And so this would affect not only that, though, but then concentrate. I don't think you could ever even produce any type of extract that would contain more than or less than 2%.
Can you imagine somehow they create shatter that's 2% THC? It'd be a waste. It would lose all of its medicinal value.
Right.
It's not medicine. The THC, along with the full spectrum of cannabinoids, is what makes it medicine, but that high THC is what's really giving people some of the most relief.
Well, yeah, I mean, clearly THC, there's a lot of cannabinoids that also work in tandem with the THC. I mean, always, I think studies have shown that a full spectrum is what's best and usually what's indicated for most medical conditions. But this would effectively eliminate I mean, but I think we can say THC is definitely one of the most crucial cannabinoids when it comes to medical marijuana, and this would effectively take that out of the mix at 2%. That really wouldn't. I think from what I've looked at over the last 20 plus years, would not really provide any meaningful medicinal value. So that's what they're trying to do with this bill. It's clearly to destroy the medical marijuana program. The problem that they're going to have with it, though, is that it doesn't comply, in my opinion, with the Arizona Voter Protection Act.
Yeah.
And I think I am probably at this point the foremost attorney in Arizona when it comes to the Voter Protection Act, having just won in 2018 the big State v. Maestas case, which was which I overturned the law. The Supreme Court agreed with me and overturned the law that restricted the possession of medical marijuana on college and university campuses. That was because of the Medical Marijuana Act. That's exactly what would be implicated here. And just to go over
You mean the Voter Protection Act?
What did I say?
Medical Marijuana Act.
Of course it implicates the Medical Marijuana Act. The Voter Protection Act protects the Medical Marijuana Act, and that's what would be implicated here. And just so everyone, refresher course real quick on the Voter Protection Act. Anytime the legislature attempts to modify a ballot initiative, voter passed ballot initiative, which this one clearly does, it actually amends the provisions of the Medical Marijuana Act, then it has to be passed by a 2/3 of both, or 3/4 of both houses.
Supermajority.
Of the legislature. So not only the Senate, but the House. This is in the House. Not only would it have to pass by that many supermajority in the House, it would then have to, the same thing in the Senate when it went there, before it would even be passed and put on the governor's table. But more than that, it has to further, the modification must further the purpose of the initiative that it modifies.
I don't see in any way, shape, or form how limiting the THC content would further the Medical Marijuana Act. It seems like that's the exact opposite.
Yeah. The purpose of the Medical Marijuana Act, fortunately, is made explicit in Section 2G of the Proposition 203 that was passed back in 2010. So there's no question about that. Again, in that Maestas Supreme Court case, they affirmed that. That's the only purpose that we're allowed to use when we're analyzing this under the Voter Protection Act. And that purpose is to protect patients and their providers from criminal and other penalties. So question, if you're growing your own, let's just say, for example, you're growing your own marijuana, you have permission. You live more than 25 miles from a dispensary, you've grown your own marijuana. You don't know what it's going to, how much THC is going to be in there. Depends on so many different variables. It could be the soil, the climate conditions,
The genetics,
your ability as a grower. But in any event, you're certainly not going to have testing equipment there to make sure before it comes off the plant that it's compliant. So that's not going to happen. So you take this, you grow this marijuana, you harvest it, you're within your allowable amount, and you happen to have it with you. Somehow a police officer pulls you over, he says, I smell marijuana. He ends up somehow or another searching your car. I'm not going to go into detail about that because that's a whole other subject. But he gets his hands on this stuff, takes it, has it tested. It ends up being, 12% marijuana, say. Now you're busted. You're in possession of marijuana exceeding the allowable percentage of 2%. Now you're subject to felony prosecution for possession of marijuana despite being a patient, because now you're no longer in compliance with the Medical Marijuana Act. How then does that comply with the stated purpose of the Medical Marijuana Act, which is to protect patients from criminal and other penalties? Because if you're arrested as a result of that and subject to prosecution, in my humble opinion, that hasn't really done much to protect you from criminal and other penalties. So clearly, in my view, this fails under the Voter Protection Act. And as I've said online, this passes, I will take this all the way to the Supreme Court. Again, fighting it under the Voter Protection Act, and I'll do that pro bono.
For those of us who don't know what pro bono is, what does that mean?
That means if this passes and anyone gets busted, come to see me and I'll take your case all the way, if necessary, to the Supreme Court, and I'll do it for free.
Woo! Yeah! That's what I like.
Yeah.
I just pulled a Nancy Pelosi.
Now,
This was an actual thing that I think deserved to be ripped up. I think they need to take this bill, take it out to the middle of the desert, and set it on fire.
Yeah, now I gotta believe that most people over there are gonna realize, at the state legislature, are gonna realize that this thing's gonna be defeated. But politics being as they are in an election year, this thing might just get passed and potentially signed by the governor for the very sake of gaining political support.
Which in that case, it would effectively be law. And this is my interpretation based off of what we've seen from the concentrates case is I haven't seen any enforcement on the dispensary side, but we've seen enforcement on the patient side.
Right, like in Jones, you mean?
Right.
And when we had Jones, for those of you who might remember Jones, that was a case where the Court of Appeals said that concentrates are no longer legal under the Medical Marijuana Act. Now, fortunately, a year later, the Supreme Court reversed that, and they are legal again today, although this law here would effectively make them illegal again, because you can't really have a concentrate that's 2% or less. That's impossible.
Right.
And that may very well be what's behind this, is they lost in Jones, and so now they're trying to be clever and find a way, sort of through the back door, so to speak, to make these concentrates illegal once again.
So if this became law, what I could expect from seeing stuff in the past is dispensaries going business as usual, selling everything they're selling all day long, every day, as they have been. But then once you buy the cannabis, when you go out into the world, a cop will be like, hey, that's marijuana. We need to make sure that that's not more than 2% THC.
Yeah.
And so what are they going to do? Start taking everybody's marijuana?
We're already seeing that. There's an article that came out recently in the Arizona Mirror, which is an online publication, dealing with this issue. I first broke this with the help of another attorney here in town sometime it's been like 3 or 4 months ago or more, where the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office is allowing law enforcement to operate a BHO extraction lab and all other kind of extractions as well. The reason that they're doing that is to establish a threshold, a ratio between how much dried flower it takes, how many grams of dried flower does it take to make 1 gram of concentrates, and now they have announced, I don't know if you've seen the new report.
What have they announced?
Last week, actually before that, but it was discussed in an article last week in Arizona Mirror. They've come up with some of those ratios, like 5 grams of flour to 1 gram of concentrates and that sort of thing. And so I think that we're going to see an effort here, because if your concentrates are limited to 2%, you're going to have to possess an awful lot of that concentrate and dab an awful lot of that concentrate to
Can you imagine a 2% shatter? Is that even possible?
Right. And you won't be able to possess enough to even allow you to reach that
it would take
amount.
all the mean potatoes out of the medical marijuana initiative.
Yeah. So this is going to first and foremost completely eliminate the concentrates market, if you will, the ability of patients to use concentrates to medicate. It'll also, I think, effectively destroy even flour, which, again, I don't know of anything that's 2% or less.
The only thing that I could think that's around 2% is hot hemp.
Right, hemp, hot hemp. We lost 40% of our hemp crop last month that tested over the 0.3% THC amount. Probably a lot of it was around 2%, I'm guessing. So effectively they're trying to reduce medical marijuana to what would be classified as hot hemp in the state of Arizona and around the country.
Well, we appreciate you coming out and saying you take that case, Tom, and we appreciate your support and everybody else's support in the concentrates the Jones issue that we had previously, because it does take a lot of people to get involved to make these things happen, because our state is pretty strong and they keep, every year, they try to do something to undo some of the freedoms we have in the medical marijuana program. So is there anything else that we want to cover on this topic before we go to our break?
I think just that this is still in committee, so it's not anything that's going to be voted on this week or anything like that. It is something that it's important to keep an eye on. I believe that this is a coordinated effort between law enforcement, prosecuting agencies, and the legislature to find a way, because they've lost in every court case trying to declare the Medical Marijuana Act to be unconstitutional, or to try to limit the Medical Marijuana Act, like in State v. Jones or in State v. Maestas, all these big attempts to really dramatically reduce the availability of medical marijuana. They've failed in all those efforts. So now I think they've regrouped. They've looked at all the court cases, Court of Appeals, Supreme Court, and they've figured out, listen, the only way to attack this is to effectively define marijuana in such a way that it leaves nothing left for patients to use. And so that's what I think this is. I'm hopeful that as long as we keep attention on this issue and certainly, talk about it, post about it, post this.
Share this broadcast.
This is HCR 2045 right now. Post a reference to it, share this broadcast, get the word out there so that the other members of the legislature know that this isn't going to be slipped in under the rug, that this isn't going to go unnoticed, and it definitely will not be left unchallenged if it ever does pass. And I think that we have a good chance, therefore, of defeating it in the legislature, or at least getting a veto from the governor, knowing that the last thing he wants to do is have a loser going into an election year in 2018.
All right. Well, coming up next, we've got Cannabis and Guns. When you can possess both and when you can't possess both, with Tom Dean, attorney for cannabis. So don't go anywhere. Stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Tom Dean, attorney for cannabis. You may know me from my work here in Arizona in important cannabis-related matters like the ASU campus ban case or the cannabis concentrates case, State v. Jones. I've been representing cannabis consumers for 26 years now, and for the last several years, I've been doing nothing but that, representing people in important criminal and DUI cases related to the use of marijuana. If you've got a case involving criminal charges, or if you're just looking for advice or wanting to enter the Arizona's cannabis industry, please give me a call. You can reach me at 602-635-4990, 602-635-4990, or visit me on the web at attorneyforcannabis.com.
This edition of Safer Arizona Wire is sponsored by azmarijuana.com, Arizona's #1 marijuana industry website. azmarijuana.com is your top quality source of Arizona cannabis news and so much more. Bypass the online censors. Sign up for their email list so their content gets sent directly to your email. Bypass the social media shadow bans. Google search AZ Marijuana Facebook, like and follow their page so their content gets sent directly to your feed. Now, back to today's regularly scheduled broadcast.
And we're back. You're watching the Safer Arizona Wire. I'm your host, David Stephen Wisniewski.
And I'm your co-host, Tom Dean, attorney for cannabis.
And right now, we're going to be talking about guns and cannabis, when you can have both and when you can't have both. Often I've heard people say, I don't want to get my medical marijuana card because I'm a gun owner. I don't want to lose my Second Amendment gun rights. And we see out there a lot of people worried about becoming a patient because they're gun owners. But not all is as it may seem. Tom Dean, break it down. What's the deal with cannabis and guns?
Well, there is cause to be for it to be something that you're concerned about, certainly. But I think that you probably need to be less concerned than you might be. And the reason for that, first of all, is we have to look at it under state law and then look at it under federal law separately.
Okay.
So let's take state law. first of all, anybody who, the law provides that anyone who is in possession of a firearm during the commission of in furtherance of a commission or during the commission of a controlled substance offense, then that is a type of what we call misconduct involving a weapon. That's a felony offense. So that means any kind of drug, that means simple possession included, and that also means marijuana. So anyone who's in possession of marijuana, growing marijuana, transporting marijuana, and you have a firearm with you, that is a violation of the law pertaining to misconduct involving a weapon. So that's the first thing. So yes, it is something to be concerned about as a marijuana consumer. However, if you are a medical marijuana patient, it's not illegal under state law for you to be in possession of a firearm because you're not involved in violating any controlled substances law. You have immunity from the controlled substances laws in Arizona, including marijuana offenses. So no marijuana offense, no firearms, no weapons offense. So for those of you who are patients, as long as you're in compliance with the Medical Marijuana Act, you have nothing to worry about under state law when it comes to firearms.
So what you're kind of describing is it's completely backwards, that you're actually more at risk in getting in trouble if you use marijuana illegally and possess a firearm than you would if you were a compliant medical marijuana patient and possessed a firearm. And it would be in your best interest if you do use marijuana to get your medical marijuana card.
Yeah, well, clearly, yes, you definitely want to have a medical marijuana card until and unless we pass a legalization initiative here in the state of Arizona. You definitely want to have your medical marijuana card if you are a gun owner, because that avoids any charge of weapons misconduct.
So you briefly mentioned the Smart and Safe initiative, and generically, if something happens, we get legalization, and we do have something going towards the 2020 election ballot here this November, which is the Smart and Safe initiative. Legalizes up to 1 ounce. You get 6 plants of home cultivation. There's some expungement going on. I'm not too thrilled about the market side of things, but I'm voting yes on it because I believe it has more good than bad. Yeah. But we can talk about that at another time.
But it would have the effect of making it legal for anyone over the age of 21 to be in possession of a firearm at the same time that they're in possession of marijuana or they're cultivating marijuana at home. Again,
so let me ask you,
complying.
If I'm, let's say, because you get 6 plants under the Smart and Safe initiative, would it be lawful for me to have a shotgun that I own just next to my 6 plants after the Smart and Safe initiative passed?
Yeah, it could even, as long as you're over 21, it could be actually, you could have that shotgun leaning up against one of the marijuana plants, and it would still be legal because you're not involved in the commission of any criminal offense.
But not right now, unless you have a medical marijuana card, because it's still illegal across the board.
Now, if you didn't, under the Medical Marijuana Act, however, let's say that you did not have authorization to cultivate, but you were caught cultivating marijuana with a firearm, that would be a weapons misconduct violation. Or let's say you were in possession of 5 ounces of marijuana and your allowable amount was only 2.5 ounces, like that's what it is for patients, 2.5 ounces. You'd be over your allowable amount. You would be in violation of the Medical Marijuana Act. You would lose your protection under the Medical Marijuana Act, and you would then also be subject to being charged with the weapons misconduct.
Damn. But hold on a second. I see posts all over the place saying that it's illegal to have marijuana with a firearm. So when is it illegal?
Even if you're a medical marijuana patient, it is illegal under federal law. So far we've been talking about state law. But under federal law, you cannot be a medical marijuana patient and legally possess a firearm.
But to that note, you can't even possess marijuana.
Right. Well, that's why, and that's exactly why. Because under federal law, marijuana remains illegal even when used medicinally. So yes, it's still illegal under federal law to possess a firearm when you're a medical marijuana patient. And actually, the reasons that they justify that, because this policy was affirmed by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, the federal Court of Appeals that that Arizona is within its jurisdiction, said that being a patient, you cannot possess a firearm because it will cause you to be mentally impaired, and basically. So it upheld the government's restriction on patients possessing firearms. Now, it's important to know, though, that as a practical matter, it's highly unlikely, and I'm certainly not encouraging anyone to violate federal law. I'm definitely not allowed to do that as an attorney. But I'm just to educate the public about this. Virtually no one, and certainly no case that I've even heard of, involves a medical marijuana patient who's been charged with illegally possessing a firearm under federal law. So the chances of anyone who's a patient who's in possession of a firearm ever being in trouble with the federal government, being arrested by the FBI or the DEA, or
I've never even heard of it,
is extremely slight. And I mean, just think, when was the last time you or anyone you know was ever stopped, pulled over by an FBI agent? I mean, they don't enforce low-level crimes. That's left to state police agents, and state police officers and agents are not allowed to enforce federal law. So the only time that you are at risk of being charged with an offense under federal law, a firearms offense, is if possibly you're stopped at Border Patrol and they discover marijuana, a medical marijuana card and a firearm, or you have an extremely large amount of marijuana and it ends up being prosecuted by the federal district court, or a huge grow, 1,000 plants or so, and it's prosecuted in federal district court. Maybe it could become an issue then. But based solely on your status as a patient, that's unheard of in my experience. I've never heard of a person that the federal government has gone after who they know to be in a possession of a firearm that somehow they also know is in possession of a medical marijuana registration. And I'm going to come back to that in a second. How is it that they would even know that? But I just want to say that the reason we know this is that there was a woman who, this Ninth Circuit case that I mentioned, she brought this case. She didn't get busted. She was a Second Amendment activist who wanted to push the envelope and decided to go out there and get her medical marijuana card just so that she could file this case to challenge the federal government's position that it was illegal for a patient to possess a firearm. So she did it. She didn't get busted. She filed the lawsuit. And it ended up going up to the Ninth Circuit, and she lost. So she wasn't someone who got busted and prosecuted. She pushed the issue. So the only reason we even know the answer to this question is because she did that. Now,
was she prosecuted for?
No, not to my knowledge. She was never actually prosecuted. She just lost her lawsuit.
Because they want you to answer yes. So we're talking about a form. I was going to ask this question here in a second. We're talking about a form here that is like a federal filter between you and buying a firearm,
from a licensed dealer.
And from a licensed dealer. And I want to ask how you can go about getting a firearm without having to go through that, but also. Yeah. I've seen that the actual form or versions of the form say that if you're a medical marijuana patient, then you have to answer yes. But she answered no, right?
She answered no.
And still didn't get in trouble for answering it wrong, according to how they want you to answer.
She made them aware that she was a medical marijuana patient, and she answered no. They denied her firearm, and she filed a lawsuit. That's how this issue even ended up, becoming a law, a published case in this country.
The only point I wanted to make is because they want you to say yes, like they say you need to say yes, pretty much. But she said no and still didn't get in trouble. Well, in my opinion, it's more of a philosophical question. Am I a user of cannabis?
Now, this was before the application said, because this is going back now about, I think, like 4 years ago now that she did this. This is before anything on the form actually said if you're a medical marijuana patient, you have to answer yes. It just said if are you a habitual drug user? I think.
Okay, so do you think that she triggered that?
But she made it known that she said, but I'm a patient and I'm signing this, and so the gun dealer denied, and then that's how the case went up. But the important part is she had to actually tell them that she was a medical marijuana patient.
Right.
Because here's the thing. If she didn't tell them that, they would have no way of knowing, at least if that case was here in the state of Arizona. And I want to make clear that I'm talking about Arizona law. I'm not talking about any other law in some other state that might have different rules about privacy. But here in Arizona, it is a criminal offense for the Department of Health Services. That's who keeps all the databases and information about medical marijuana patients. It's illegal for them to disclose any information to law enforcement without them first obtaining a search warrant, which means they have to go to a judge with probable cause that this person is in violation of the law. As I mentioned, it isn't a violation of state law for a patient to be in possession of a firearm, and they get a warrant. Otherwise, all they have access to is a database that they can look up only based on registration number, and they have no way of knowing your registration number unless you give them your medical marijuana card. Now, if they get your card, then they see the registration number, they can enter it in, and they can see whether or not your card is valid. They can also see any medical marijuana that you purchased in the last 60 days. They can see how much you have obtained. That's it. That's all they can see. And they can't do a search of the database based on your name or your address or your driver's license number or anything else. Only your medical marijuana card registration number. So if they don't have that card, there's no way that they could ever go up and figure out that you're a patient. So there's no way that a federally licensed firearms dealer could somehow look you up by name and see that you're a patient. There's no way that any federal law enforcement agency could look you up and figure out based on your name only whether or not you're a patient. So again, my caveat here is I'm not telling you this to encourage you to violate federal law, which says that you can't possess a firearm if you're a patient, medical marijuana patient. I'm just because people often ask, well, how do they know? And the answer is they only know if you tell them, because they can't legally access that information unless they get a search warrant. And the only way they're getting a search warrant is if they have probable cause that you're in violation of the law. That is state law if it's a state judge that they're going to for the warrant, or federal law if it's a federal judge that they're going to for the warrant. So I guess what I'm saying is it is unheard of and would be extremely difficult, even if they wanted to, for federal law enforcement to determine that an individual is a patient, and in order to try to figure out if their possession of a firearm is lawful, unless that person tells them that they are. So
what about avoiding that process, not using that federal filter? Are there other ways in Arizona for you to legally obtain a firearm without going through a licensed dealer?
If the form asks you if you're a patient, or if you know that the policy is that you have to answer yes to the question of if you are a habitual user of illegal drugs, and you answer it no, then that is potentially a fraud. That's a felony fraud violation for falsely filling out a federal application. So I would not recommend. I can't recommend that anybody, knowingly falsify an application for a firearm. And again, you say, well, how is it false? I'm a medical marijuana patient. This isn't illegal for me. You're right under state law. Under federal law, though, it's still an illicit substance. And so under federal law, it is a controlled substance, an illegal controlled substance. And so if you answered no to that question, then you could be looking at more than just getting in trouble for possessing a firearm if they found out about it. Again,
but that girl didn't get in trouble for answering no.
Right, because it's it appears to be a very low enforcement priority, number one. And number two...
That's why, in my opinion, I'm not an attorney, but in my opinion, it's a philosophical question. The reason why, because let's say I smoked weed 10 years ago and I'm no longer a user today, I would honestly be answering that I am not a user.
Yeah.
However, why do I have to, in my head, arbitrarily have that 10-year limit? At what point, when you stop smoking marijuana, do you not become a user anymore?
In my opinion, it could be just the next day. This is a question that we don't know the exact answer to.
But that's why I say it's philosophical rather than concrete.
If you were a medical marijuana patient today and then called and filed the application to relinquish your medical marijuana card, which you can do, in my opinion, you could go and you stopped consuming marijuana, you could go to
I quit
firearm the next day, in my opinion.
I quit marijuana today, and tomorrow I'm going to get a firearm.
And also, if you're a caregiver and you're not a patient,
but then the day after I relapsed.
Legal. Yeah, well, so then it becomes illegal, because then if you become a habitual, it doesn't matter if you're a patient or not. If you are a regular user of cannabis, it is illegal for you to possess a firearm under federal law. whether you're a patient or otherwise.
Well,
So it doesn't matter. You
but
say,
what about avoiding that process altogether? Can't they just go to a private person and buy one?
well, okay. First of all, it still remains illegal for you to be a medical marijuana patient and be in possession of a firearm. It remains
At a federal level.
At a federal level. It remains illegal for you to be, even if you're not a patient, if you, consume marijuana on a regular basis, it's illegal to possess a firearm under federal law. So it doesn't matter whether you're a patient or not. That makes no difference whatsoever. And they have no ability to determine whether you are a patient. So really, it's a false dichotomy. There's really no distinction between being a patient and not being a patient, except that it's presumed that you're a habitual user of an illicit substance,
And
if you're a
that
patient,
the
if you're a
state
registered
cops
patient.
won't do anything if you're
Well,
compliant.
they don't, because it's legal. It is perfectly lawful under state law for you to be both a patient and in possession of a firearm. In fact, you could have marijuana in one pocket and a firearm on the other hip, and that's perfectly legal under state law as long as you're a medical marijuana patient.
Arizona.
Yeah. So, did you ask me a question?
Well, I think we've covered state law, we've covered federal law, we covered why it was brought into public, and then I think we also went over 2020 if this does pass under state law. But I think what I wanted to know was how to avoid that process altogether. Couldn't you go to a private
Yeah.
seller?
Okay. Right. That's a good question. But let me just really first let me be very clear. You're much better off if you're a firearm owner, to definitely be a medical marijuana patient at the same time. Under all the circumstances, you're much better off being a registered medical marijuana patient in possession of a firearm versus being a regular consumer of cannabis without a medical marijuana card and in possession of a firearm, because then you're busted under state law. And let's face it, 99.999% of the time anyone who ever has any contact with law enforcement, it's with a police officer or a sheriff deputy or a state trooper, and they're going to be enforcing state laws. And if you don't have that card, you're busted. Potentially, they're going to file those weapons misconduct charges. So it would be foolish, in my opinion, to be a cannabis consumer who has firearms and not also be a registered medical marijuana patient. That's the best way to protect your gun rights under Arizona law.
That's some heavy intel.
So now, as far as that other question, which is really important, and again,
Yeah, because what if I don't even want to have to go through that process? Like, do I have to?
well, no, because so Dave is asking under federal law, if I go to a federally licensed firearms distributor, I have to fill out this form that in which I promise, I attest that I'm not a habitual user of a controlled substance, of an illegal or illicit substance. And so what if but you don't have to go through a federally licensed dealer. You don't have to. Like if Dave is a medical marijuana patient and I have a firearm that I want to sell, he could come to me and I could sell it to him and he'd never have to fill out any forms. That's a private sale. And
How do gun shows work?
well, gun shows have evolved over the years. It used to be when you went to a gun show, let's say you went to a gun show 20 years ago, hardly anybody was doing federal background checks, and everything was a private transaction. And so there was never any form to fill out or anything like that. More and more, though, under pressure from the federal government, these firearm shows, many of them are starting to, most of the vendors at these shows are they're running people through the federal database. So firearm gun shows are not as convenient as they once were, but certainly a transaction through Craigslist or from person to person, none of that requires a background check. So you'll never be in a position of answering a question falsely about whether or not you're a medical marijuana patient. Again, technically still, if you are a medical marijuana patient or if you're not a patient but you're a regular user of cannabis, it's illegal for you to be in possession of a firearm under federal law. So technically, even if you bought it through a private sale, and you didn't have to fill out a form and do a background check, it would still be illegal for you to possess that under federal law.
But under state
Technically.
law, as long as you have your medical marijuana card and you're compliant, you are good. Tom, we got about 60 seconds left. Do you have anything left before we conclude this broadcast day?
Again, I would emphasize that if you are someone who possesses firearms and you want to preserve your Second Amendment rights, then I recommend highly, if you are a cannabis consumer, that you do have a medical marijuana card registration, because that will 99.999% of the time avoid you from being arrested or charged or prosecuted for any form of weapons misconduct charge.
All right. And I know this is a very hot topic, and a lot of you might have not had your questions answered. So if you have any extra questions, please post them in the thread below. And this was the Safer Arizona Wire with David Stephen Wisniewski.
And Tom Dean, attorney for cannabis.
Thank you.
This edition of Safer Arizona Wire is sponsored by azmarijuana.com, Arizona's #1 marijuana industry website. azmarijuana.com is your top quality source of Arizona cannabis news and so much more. Bypass the online censors. Sign up for their email list so their content gets sent directly to your email. Bypass the social media shadow bans. Google search AZ Marijuana Facebook, like and follow their page so their content gets sent directly to your feed. Now, back to today's regularly scheduled broadcast.
Hi, I'm Tom Dean, attorney for cannabis. You may know me from my work here in Arizona in important cannabis-related matters like the ASU campus ban case or the cannabis concentrates case, State v. Jones. I've been representing cannabis consumers for 26 years now, and for the last several years, I've been doing nothing but that, representing people in important criminal and DUI cases related to the use of marijuana. If you've got a case involving criminal charges, or if you're just looking for advice or wanting to enter the Arizona's cannabis industry, please give me a call. You can reach me at 602-635-4990, 602-635-4990, or visit me on the web at attorneyforcannabis.com.